Coming up next, Sitting at 30 takes you downtown for the weekly luncheon meeting of the City Club of Portland. Live weekly coverage of City Club is made possible in part by TCI and is produced through the facilities of Portland Cable Access. Now we join the City Club for this week's program.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club of Portland. I'm Pete Heuser, your president-elect. Today we're going to be able to get right to our program. We don't have a program next week so that we can all celebrate the Memorial Day weekend. In 2 weeks we'll hear from Mark Roscoe, who is governor of Montana. He'll talk here at the Convention Center. Then after that our programs will get back to the Multnomah Club, our base of operations. This week our board host is Sharon Brabenek. Sharon is a member of the Board of Governors. She'll ask the first question of the panel, and then we'll open it up to City Club members in the audience. Now, in asking your questions, feel free to direct it to any one of the panelists or to the entire panel, and they can all discuss your question. Our program is made possible in part today because of generous corporate contributions from the law firm of Miller, Nash, Weiner, Hager, and Carlson, U.S. Bank, and Legacy Health Systems. In 1992, candidate Bill Clinton told us that he wanted to end welfare as we know it. Now, many of us had heard that before and didn't really think much would be done. And in fact, in the first 2 years of the administration, there wasn't much done on welfare reform as the president was focusing on the healthcare industry. But after the 1994 elections formed a new Republican Congress, and the president realized that he needed to move beyond health care, the president and Congress began to work together on welfare reform, although they both certainly had very different visions of what it would eventually look like. And that's exhibited by the fact that there were 2 presidential vetoes in the next year and a half due to legislation that the president just felt was too punitive and unnecessarily restricted. But in 1996, the president signed into law a welfare reform measure that cut $56 billion from welfare spending and granted the states vast new powers and granted block grants as well. Now, the process that this legislation followed through Congress was kind of interesting in that it was much like Nixon going to China, in that it's probably very likely that welfare reform wouldn't have gotten through Congress in the form that it did had there been a Republican president. But given that there was a Democratic president pushing it through, something got done. Now we see everyone lining up to take credit for welfare reform, but much of the credit is probably really due to the states themselves who had the flexibility and were granted the money in order to establish and fund welfare reform programs. Now, the way the states handled this was quite different. Some of the states, like Wisconsin, established aggressive workfare programs which forced aid recipients into jobs even sooner than federal mandates would have required. Now, in these states, they often saw stiff but usually unsuccessful opposition. Oregon was a little bit different in that Oregon was quite successful, has been quite successful, without much political fallout. Now, this may be because we have a popular Democratic governor, maybe another Nixon in China thing, but it appears to be primarily due to the establishment of an intensive case management system. And Gary Weeks perhaps will talk a bit about this. And through that system, Oregon has reduced its welfare rolls by almost more than any other state, not by focusing on deadlines, but by making sure that aid recipients were merely moving toward employability. Gordon Dickey, today's moderator, will provide an overview of welfare reform in Oregon and as it is affected by the church, and touch upon some of the problems that it has created. Mr. Dickey is a social worker and counselor in private practice. He's primarily involved in assisting nonprofit organizations like Ecumenical Ministries, the Easter Seal Society, and St. Vincent de Paul. Gary Weeks, the director of Oregon's Department of Human Resources, will talk to us in more detail about the state's welfare reform programs and give us a progress report on the dramatic reductions in the number of the people that are on public assistance. He's been director since 1995 and now manages a staff of over 10,000 employees. I had to check with him to make sure that was right, but he says yes, over 10,000 employees and a 2-year budget of over $5 billion. Prior to becoming Director of Human Resources, Mr. Weeks was the Director of the Oregon Lottery and in 1992 was named State Manager of the Year. David Leslie will talk to us about the faith community's historic role of addressing unmet needs and will focus on what has been done in the last couple of years to deal with those who have fell to the bottom as a result of welfare reform. Mr. Leslie came to Oregon only 1 year ago and assumed the post of Executive Director of Ecumenical Ministries, a statewide association of 16 Christian denominations. Prior to coming to Oregon, he worked in Houston as the Executive Director of Interfaith Ministries, an organization of 300 congregations representing Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, and Hindu communities. With that background, we're fortunate he came to Portland rather than going to the Middle East or to the UN to work as a mediator. We're also very pleased to have with us today Archbishop John Vlazny. Archbishop Vlazny is also new to Oregon, having been installed as the Archbishop of Portland's Archdiocese in only December of 1997. Prior to that, he served as a bishop in Minnesota and vicar in his native Chicago. Archbishop Vlazny will talk about what the Catholic Church is doing to provide a safety net for those that need more assistance than the government can provide. Now we'll see whether their speakers had a chance to work on their speeches last night or whether they watched Seinfeld like the rest of us. Gordon Dickey.
Thank you. Good afternoon. John Paul Getty has said that to become rich, you need to do 3 things. First, you need to get up early in the morning. Second, you need to work hard all day. And third, you need to strike oil. Well, Americans are doing 2 of those things. They're getting up early in the morning, they're working hard all day, but they're not sharing in the greatest expansion of wealth in the history of this country, which has taken place during the 1980s and is now taking place during the 1990s. During this decade of prosperity, Oregonians have enjoyed a healthy economy, growing faster than the national rate. We've become better educated, we've enjoyed expanded health care, and thanks to Governor Kitzhaber's leadership, in 1990, 80% of children in this state had health coverage, and today it's 92%. We've also experienced a population growth rate twice the U.S. average, which has boosted home prices to be among the highest in the nation. Oregon leads the nation in welfare reform, as Pete just said. In 1994, there were 40,000 households in Oregon on welfare. Today, there are 19,000. Our unemployment rate, even though it's 5.1, slightly higher than the national average, is still at a historical low. So while business is booming and employment levels are rising, the gap between the rich and the poor is increasing, and also there are more poor among us. The book, The Millionaire Next Door, reports the explosion of wealth in our society. Today, Americans hold $22 trillion. The problem with that is that 51% of it is held by 3.5% of the population. The Millionaire Next Door reports that in the Puget Sound area alone, since 1985, there's 100,000 new millionaires. In the Portland metropolitan area, there is now 40,000 new millionaires since 1985. It's projected to be 65,000 by the year 2005. During the last 2 business cycles, incomes of the richest 1% in America has increased by 20%. The poorest 20% of Americans has decreased by 10%. The stock market has had a 16.5% increase each year since 1989, but 6 out of 10 households in our country have no share in the stock market. In major corporations in 1995, the average CEO salary was 157 times the average worker salary. And the glaring example is the CEO at Disney, Michael Eisner. His contract extension, the bonuses and the stock options amounted to $196 million. In the words of the conservative analyst Kevin Phillips, this means the rich got richer, the poor got poorer, the middle class also got poorer, and they also lost ground relative to the rich. Now, if you want to read something really good on a comprehensive, updated study on poverty in America, it's the recently released study by the Milton S. Eisenhower study on the 30th anniversary of the Kerner Report, and here's some of the findings. During the 1980s, child poverty in our country has increased by 20%. Racial minorities have suffered disproportionately. Today, child poverty in the United States is 4 times the average of other Western countries. In terms of wealth and income, the United States is the most unequal industrialized country in the Western world, and again, racial minorities, women and children suffer disproportionately. In urban public schools in poor neighborhoods, more than 2/3 of the children fail to reach the basic standards established by the government. The housing policy of the poor and minorities have become prison building. Since 1980, we have tripled the number of prison cells, and at the same time, we've reduced housing assisted supplements for the poor by 80%. The states now spend more per year on prisons than they do higher education, and 20 years ago, that was just the reverse. So what does this mean to Oregonians? And how is poverty growing in Oregon? There's 4 indicators. First, the Oregon Food Bank is serving more people. Almost 400,000 Oregonians were assisted with emergency food this last year in 1997. 2, the emergency shelters are seeing an increased need. In Portland alone, they have that one-night count that they do every year. This last year, there were 2,600 persons seeking emergency shelter. They either received it or they were turned away, and that was almost a 10% increase over the year before. Church feeding programs and homeless shelters are also reporting an increase, and typically it's working families. And then lastly, we have historically undercounted the poor and those who are unemployed. Former Secretary of Labor Richard Reich has estimated that if we would count those people who fall off the rolls, if we would count the homeless, legal and illegal immigrants, refugees, the physically and mentally disabled, the unemployment rate would be 2 to 3 times higher than it is reported. In the book, The Undeserving Poor, Michael Katz states that in 1992, the poverty figure of 38 million should really be 53 million. So what do we have to learn from this? We need to learn that the gap between the rich and the poor is growing in our state, in our country, and around the world. The United Nations and the World Council of Churches have called an alarm to the disparity between, the growing disparity between the rich and the poor countries. Number 2, that people in poverty are increasing. Number 3, the new poor are the working poor. There's the Century Fund at the University of California estimates that 56 of people in poverty in this country have someone working in their family. The problem is they're working part-time, they're working at low wages, or they're doing seasonal work. And then we need to learn that the United States, we are at the front end of a 7-year glide path for welfare reform. When we balanced the budget in this country, we did it, the biggest share came from social services. If you would add up during the 7 years of welfare reform, the cumulative cuts in social services, it amounts to $245 billion. And finally, the Tufts University Center on Hunger and Poverty recently ranked the states on welfare reform, and the good news is that Oregon leads, along with Vermont, leads the country. The bad news is there's only 8 states that were characterized as doing a good job. It looks like back in 1996, the critics of welfare reform could be right, that we will be disinvesting in the poor in this country. Many people think that welfare reform is the light at the end of the tunnel, And as we'll hear from Gary, it certainly is for many, many poor people. But for other poor people, it's not a light at the end of the tunnel, it's a train. Now, in conclusion, we as a community need to get serious with systemic changes, such as dealing with tax policies, minimum wage legislation, increased medical coverage for the working poor, child care support, affordable housing initiatives, and cutting the military budget and corporate welfare. That Eisenhower report has statistics that show that corporate welfare in this country amounts to over $100 billion. In our own personal lives, we need to come to terms with Mahatma Gandhi's antidote that there is enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Thank you very much.
Well, Gordon has provided us, I think, with a good background introduction to this conversation. And I want to say first to all of you how pleased and honored I am to have a chance to be here today, to be up on a platform with all these distinguished people, but particularly with the new Archbishop Vlazny and with Mr. Leslie, two people that have a long and strong history of compassion and of commitment to people who are in need in this state and in this country. So it's a great honor for me to be here. Also to be with you all. The City Club I've admired for a long time because of its contributions not only to Portland, but I think the broader contributions that the City Club has made to the state of Oregon as a whole. I have to say I've only had a chance to talk with the Archbishop for a few minutes, but it's clear to me that the Archdiocese hasn't told him of that unfortunate incident in 1959 an Easter morning in Star of the Sea Church down in Brookings when some poor altar boy lit the Easter floral arrangement afire along with the candles and nearly burned down the church. My mother has asked me, Archbishop, to make sure you understand there are two sides to that story when it's finally reported to you by your staff in the Archdiocese. I appreciate the chance to be here to talk to you about an encouraging story that we think Oregon can tell, a story that isn't often well known nor even often well reported. And the story is simply that Oregon welfare reform is working to improve the lives of thousands of people in Oregon. I want to give you a few facts to tell you how we've gotten to where we are and share with you where we intend to go from the point we're at now. First, let me talk to you about three facts. One and most important is you need to understand that Oregon adopted the principles of welfare reform long before the Congress and the President acted in 1996 to bring about welfare reform in this country. In fact, we're celebrating in this city the 10th anniversary of one of our oldest and strongest welfare to work programs, Steps to Success. Some of the staff who had a part in that program are here. It's a major partnership with Clackamas Community, Mount Hood Community College, and has a long 10-year history. As Gordon reported, in the past since 1994, we have reduced our caseload from 44,000 to 19,000. This means that thousands of families that were living at 75% of the federal poverty level now are working and living at 130% of the federal poverty level and possibly higher with opportunities to advance beyond that. Second fact that you need to know is we do not punish people in Oregon for being poor. Unlike some states, Oregon has not tightened its eligibility rules. We've not used bureaucratic processes and procedures to reduce our welfare numbers. And the benefits in this state continue to be in the top 1/3 that are offered in this country. Unlike most states, fact number 3, Oregon does not have a time limit on its welfare eligibility. We're not a state that says 2 years and you're out. We believe that if you cooperate and work with us, you will move from welfare to employment in a 2-year period of time. And if you need more time to do that, we want to give you the help you need. There's no point in us rushing someone through to a work program only to have them return. Now, there are going to be those people that have said and will continue to say that success in Oregon is based on good times. You know, it's the people who say it's the economy, stupid. Anybody can do well when you're in a good economy. And we would say, of course it's the economy as a factor. No one doubts that. But if it were only the economy, then other states with very robust economies, very energetic economies, would have already decreased their welfare rolls in the same way Oregon has, without tougher eligibility requirements, without arbitrary time frames, and that hasn't happened. Hasn't happened in this country. We've changed how we've done business. That's an important thing for you to understand. Historically, the job of the people in the Adult and Family Services Division was to determine whether people were eligible for welfare. And if they were, to calculate the monthly amount accurately and to deliver the check on time. That was the mission. Calculate eligibility, deliver the check on time, make sure it's correct. Now we believe in the capacity of the people that we serve. We believe in their capacity to achieve. We believe that if you help people, they're able to work to support themselves and their children. We believe that people want independence. They want the independence of earning an income, of paying their fair share of taxes. We believe that. We believe that if given a chance, a person's attachment to the workforce will result in more responsibility, more income, and success. Now, obviously, we make exceptions to the policies we have. We make exceptions for people that are disabled and unable to work. We make exceptions for people that are in treatment to overcome barriers to employment, like alcohol and drug abuse, mental illness. We make exceptions for people, women who have infant children and are unable to come to work immediately. But for years, our offices in Adult and Family Services were known as the Welfare Office. Now we're trying to change that and create self-sufficiency centers. In reality, the goal is to try to make the Welfare Office look more and more like an employment office. For example, we expect people on welfare to spend 35 to 40 hours a week in job training, in job search, in learning the ethic of the workplace. And what does that mean? It means learning how to be on time, learning how to do what you say you'll do, learning how to get along with people, how to hold a job like most Americans do. We don't think that welfare checks are a path out of poverty. We believe that work is always better than welfare, always. I mentioned to you that a household on welfare is living at 75% of the federal poverty level. I said to you that employment raises that figure to 130% of the poverty level. And that's if the head of household is only working at the state's minimum wage. Typically, the person that moves from welfare to work in this state is not earning the $6 minimum wage, but they're earning approximately $7 an hour. Another reason that we're successful in welfare reform in this state is that when you leave welfare, supports follow you. When you leave welfare, you're eligible for the Oregon Health Plan's medical and dental coverage for at least a year. After you leave welfare, you're eligible for a child care subsidy until your household reaches 200% of the federal poverty level. That's $2,300 a month for a family of 3. After you leave welfare, we work hard to explain to people that they may qualify for federal earned income tax credit. That's like a cash bonus that adds an extra $1 an hour to your wages. But it's not enough just to get people off welfare into the workforce. As I said earlier, we don't want them to return to welfare. In 18 months after getting off welfare, more than 90% of the people that were formerly on welfare in this state remain off welfare. Now, what's the next step for us? The next step for us is to try to help people figure out how they get that second and that third job. If you're looking for a soundbite, it would be your first job's not your last job. And the way to do that, some examples, we're inviting clients back into the offices to use our sites to upgrade their computer skills, to upgrade their resumes, to learn about job opportunities. We want our facilities open evenings and weekends and accessible to our former clients to try to improve their work position. In this next legislative session, we're going to introduce measures to the legislature that will provide even more opportunities for people to move from that first job to the next job and the next job and the next job. And we do this not because it's just the right thing to do, it is, but we do it is because it's not good public policy to move people to just above minimum wage and then provide state supports for their entire career. That's not good public policy. Now, while a lot of this country looks to Oregon for answers, we don't have all the answers. We know that. There's an ancient Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." And we do. We live in very interesting times. As Gordon pointed out, we're experiencing a very robust economy, Wages are up. Unemployment in not all parts of the state, but many parts of the state are down. And yet the poverty benchmark that we established in the state some time ago has not yet been achieved. That poverty results from a whole variety of experiences that people have, and Gordon alluded to some of them, but they include lack of education, underemployment, low wages, inadequate health care, lack of affordable housing, substance abuse, taxing policies. These are just a few of the things that have an impact on poverty in this state and in this country. And the solutions to poverty in the state are not one-size-fits-all solutions. And they're not solutions that are the province of only the Department of Human Resources. They're solutions that must in large measure be crafted by communities according to the needs and the resources of those communities, and they're solutions that require from all of us a new paradigm of partnerships. Government alone cannot and will not solve a problem as complex as poverty. There are many other sectors of society that have to contribute, and most certainly the faith community, as represented by the two individuals sitting next to me. We could not have achieved the success we've achieved in welfare reform without our partners in business, in education, in local government, and the faith community. And we won't be successful in the future without these partnerships. We are going to continue to learn from the experience that we have. We're going to continue to try to listen to the clients that we serve and to our partners and to improve the outcomes for Oregon families. We're going to continue to value your support in this audience and your ideas, and we believe that the citizens of this state will continue to value the improved quality of life and the genuine self-sufficiency that we're trying to achieve by Oregon welfare reform. And I want to thank you once more for the kindness that you've shown me to have this opportunity to talk with you and be on the stage with these two individuals. Thank you very much.
Ecumenical Ministries has a tendency to be a little bit of a maverick. Do you mind if I use a podium to break away from this tradition? It's a little hard to sit and talk about something so meaningful and so passionate. Peter, I want to thank you and the Board of Governors, the Program Committee of the City Club for the opportunity to be here, especially so new to the state, but to have this opportunity to speak this morning. So thank you. When it comes to the welfare, the well-being of people in this country, the state needs the religious community, and the religious community needs the state. This statement is neither radical nor new, but it is rooted in an historic relationship between church and state, a relationship that, while ebbing and flowing over the years, has been present since the inception of this country. Today, the complexities and immensity of human community needs demand that no one sector, as we just heard, no one sector of society be responsible for addressing all these needs. Effectively addressing the needs of individuals and families at risk and on the margins depends that all sectors of society, government, philanthropic, private, and religious, work together. At issue today, though, is the proportionality of institutional responsibility in this joint task. House Speaker Newt Gingrich and people like Marvin Olasky, the author of Tragedy of American Compassion, have offered new models that de-emphasize the role of government and enhance the role of the faith community in addressing the welfare of people in need in this society. While there are laudable aspects of these movements, such as recognizing the importance of the faith community, the importance of the individual's role in decision-making, and of course the importance of work, there are also problems. These problems include oftentimes a fundamental misunderstanding about the primary mission of the congregation, which is to worship God primary and not to provide social services. Additionally, there are exaggerated claims made at times by government and the faith community alike concerning the faith community's capacity to deliver such services. These problems, combined with intentional efforts to curtail the role of the faith community and the nonprofit community in general as an advocate for the poor and people we serve, make the faith community's service task all the more difficult. Yet through all these challenges, the faith community continues to be an active participant in the welfare delivery system and debates about such. Compelled by justice principles as well as the human need at our front doors, congregations throughout this state and our nation are leaders in contributing dollars, human energy, in-kind resources, and even their physical plants in an ongoing effort to meet human need. The faith community has developed an impressive program and service delivery infrastructure designed to address the needs of people at the margin of society. Organizations such as Jewish Family Services, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Family Services, Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, Portland Organizing Project, and Albina Ministerial Alliance. These organizations help ensure that the neediest in society have both access to basic life necessities as well as the support to move towards self-sufficiency and away from welfare. EMO, Catholic Charities, and the other organizations that I mentioned have created impressive programs and networks to also serve newly arrived refugees to Oregon, helping to ensure that our newest neighbors can move towards self-sufficiency and become contributing members in their new community. And congregations are also active partners. Here in this state, Peace Lutheran Church in Burns, for example, provides a hot meal program during the summer for children and youth on the Burns Paiute Reservation. The church also purchased and remodeled a hotel to create a shelter for women who are victims of domestic violence. And you heard something about the Oregon Food Bank. Approximately 90% of their 270 partner agencies throughout this state are congregationally based. In downtown Portland, you'll find First United Methodist Church, which has a homeless shelter for families, offering both safe sleeping places, but also important social service support to help connect people to resources needed to move from welfare to work, from shelters to homes. In Northeast Portland, Emmanuel Full Gospel Temple has helped develop the Renaissance Market, allowing people access to affordable quality food and jobs in their neighborhood. And First Presbyterian Church in downtown Portland provides affordable rental options through Alder House so that people can spend less of their income on rent and more onto necessities such as food, clothing, education, increasing the option of moving off of welfare and into other aspects of life. The bottom line is this: Oregon's faith community is informed, sophisticated, and experienced in addressing Oregonians' needs. And the contribution made is more than the sum of all the services provided. The faith community of Oregon also plays a critical advocacy role in helping to shape the various systems, the policies, the programs, and the resources allocated to serve the poor. Our religious traditions teach, and democracy demands, that the faith community has both the right and the obligation to participate in the political process. The faith community as an advocate offers visions of the just society in the marketplace of ideas, focusing on the ways that people should be served, the context within which these services are provided, and the ways that society should be ordered to ensure that those who are the least amongst us have voice and input into their own destiny. Examples of the ways that the faith community is involved in this aspect of life in America and in this state include recent events like when the U.S. Senate on Tuesday voted to restore food stamps to 250,000 legal immigrants and refugees retreating from some of the provisions of the 1996 welfare law. The church community, the religious community, was part of that advocacy effort. When reports are issued by governmental agencies about the so-called success of welfare reform, as evidenced by smaller welfare rolls, it is often the faith community that leads efforts to dig deeper into these claims in order to find out just how many people really are finding jobs with livable wages, how many children are really living in poverty, and how many families are really self-sufficient. In Oregon, the faith community is often a leading advocate for justice equity, and a voice for all who are members of our lower caste systems. I know from firsthand experience in Oregon, in Texas, in Ohio, and other states that I have lived and worked, that the faith community leads advocacy efforts oftentimes in public policy arenas for funding of critically needed human services. In this so-called era, the era of devolution of the welfare system in this country, there's a renewed interest in the role of the religious community as a partner with government as providers of services. In Texas, where I served just prior to coming to Oregon, things were really getting wild. Comptroller John Sharp started the Family Pathfinders program. The program's mission is to help women in the Jobs and Jobs Plus program move from welfare to work through the help of community partners, including congregations, partners who provide support such as job preparation assistance, transportation, and child care. The program is modeled on Mississippi Governor Kurt Fordyce's program, Faith and Families, one of the first programs in this country that used religious congregations to help move people from welfare to work. The chair, by the way, of the Family Pathfinders, the advisory chair, is Bishop John McCarthy of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Austin. But at the time when the comptroller started his program, not to be outdone by his Democratic colleague, Republican Governor George Bush Jr. launched a faith-based providers initiative. Governor Bush, in doing so, said, "Government should welcome the help of faith-based institutions. Church and state should work together with respect for our differences and reverence for our shared goals. The state should not be so process-oriented that it stifles good programs that produce results. As long as basic health and safety standards are being met, then faith-based organizations should be given the chance to make a difference." Through the charitable choice provisions of the 1996 welfare reform legislation, programs that are based on intentional church-state partnerships, like the Family Pathfinder program, will be the norm, not the exception. One can find such programs in Michigan, Maryland, Colorado, and Virginia, and many other states. If an agreed upon goal is equitably, compassionately, and efficiently addressing people's needs, to move people from welfare to work, and to help people help themselves and to create their capacity to do so, then let me end where I began just a minute ago. The state needs the religious community, and the religious community needs a state. Neither the church, the synagogue, the mosque, nor the temple, nor all of our faith-based social service systems combined can meet all the human need in this country and in this state. Hence, the state welfare system and its many ancillaries are definitely needed. Yet the faith community has much to offer and must be a part of the continuum of care, not only as provider, but also as advocate. Clearly, issues like institutional proportionality related to service providing and the terms, the ground upon which such partnerships are developed, will need ongoing scrutiny and discussion. The faith community, in closing, has an essential role to play in meeting the welfare needs of Oregonians. And remember, I use welfare to be well-being, not system language. The faith community must provide services in partnership with the state and also have the freedom to act as an advocate. And let me add a final note to this point. It is critical that the state and its policymakers respect the right of the faith community to share its vision in public policy arenas about the common good and the elements of a just society. This essential aspect of a democracy must never be lost or challenged, no matter how uncomfortable it may make us at times. In fact, it is just possible that within this discomfort, within the ongoing unsettling debates and questions that are called about our priorities and the systems that we develop, that we may indeed find a bit of comfort that the welfare, the well-being of people in Oregon, as well as throughout this nation, is truly being considered. I want to thank again the leadership of the City Club for the invitation to be here, and I welcome your questions. Thank you very much.
Hal Roach, the Irish humorist, tells a story about the street evangelist who met a Catholic walking down the street in Dublin, and he said to him, "How'd you like to be a Jehovah's Witness?" And the unknowing and unsuspecting Catholic responded, "I didn't even see the accident." Sometimes we don't know a lot about one another, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity, at least to help you become a little bit more familiar with the Catholic perspective on the effort we make as citizens to reach out to the poor and needy, especially through initiatives like welfare reform here in Oregon. Back in the late spring of 1995, when I was still a Minnesotan and the Oregon legislature was debating welfare reform, my brother bishop from east of the Cascades, the Most Reverend Thomas J. Connolly of Baker, offered testimony before the House Ways and Means Subcommittee on Human Resources. And at that time he stated, "Public policy, to be just, must help the poor enjoy their fair share of God's blessings bestowed upon the earth, including economic blessings. I must ask you to remember that poverty is the enemy of us all. Poor people are not. My prayer for you is that you have the wisdom to design public policy which is just." We all talk about justice in our churches, in the legislature, in the marketplace. And so in my remarks about working together for justice, it's only fair for you to understand my working definition of this critical virtue. In both the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, we find justice described in terms of a sense of what is right. Justice is proclaimed as fidelity to the demands of a relationship. The original order of creation called for all people to live together in harmony, but many of us do not. Biblical justice calls for right relationships on our part, first of all with God, then with one another, and finally with all of creation. The works of justice require right relationships in all three areas. And so it's no wonder that we have difficulty achieving the solutions to some of our present-day dilemmas when we ignore one or another dimension of justice. I think it's also interesting to note that in both the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, poor people are not always the economically poor. Poor people are those who are powerless. And this might help you understand some of our Catholic Christian concern for children, including the unborn, and also our frail, elderly, and sick friends. There are 6 basic principles at the heart of all Catholic social teaching. And I would ask you please to allow me to review with you those 6 principles quickly before citing some specific efforts made on the part of the Catholic community of Western Oregon in its works for justice. The 6 principles touch upon the life and dignity of each human person, human rights and responsibilities, the call to family and community, the dignity of work and the right of workers, the option for the poor, and solidarity. Let me say a word about each one. The life and dignity of the human person. For us, life which comes from God is sacred, and each person possesses a basic God-given dignity. Each person. Secondly, human rights and responsibilities. The right to life includes religious liberty, decent work, housing, health care, education, and the right to raise and provide for a family with dignity. We have a duty to work for the common good. Thirdly, the call to family and community. The human person is not only sacred, but social. We realize our dignity and achieve our rights and relationships with others in our families and in our communities. As for the dignity of work and the rights of workers, work is an expression of our dignity. It's not an enslavement. And workers have basic rights to decent work, to just wages, to form and join unions. Fifthly, the option for the poor. The needs of the poor and vulnerable must be put first in our institutions and our policies. And as for solidarity, we are all one human family, despite national, racial, ethnic, economic, and ideological differences. We are linked to our immediate and global neighbors at all levels. The social services of the Catholic community reflect a balance, I hope, of the works of charity, complemented at the same time by the work of community organizing and empowerment of the poor. It's not enough to give a poor person a fish. Ultimately, you have to teach them how to fish. And so allow me now to cite 3 examples of the ways the Catholic community of Western Oregon today is engaged in social services that empower and help people get organized during this era of welfare reform. The first one I want to mention is that the social services arm of the Archdiocese of Portland, which includes everything west of the Cascades, is Catholic Charities. And Catholic Charities serves more than 100,000 people annually in Western Oregon without regard to faith, race, sex, or age. We don't help them because they're Catholic. We help them because we're Catholic. Some Catholic Charities programs provide emergency food, clothing, and shelter. But the overriding objective is to provide people with the tools they need to become self-sufficient and attain their true human potential. Pregnant girls preparing to be mothers, individuals living with AIDS, immigrants resettling their families, and children resisting gang involvement are some of the people that Catholic Charities is committed to protect and to serve. Secondly, our United States Catholic Conference, which is based in Washington, D.C., sponsors an annual Catholic campaign for human development. And since arriving here in Oregon, I arrived 5 months ago today, made it through the airport, even got my luggage, I have been pleased. I have been pleased to learn that the campaign is very strong right here in the Northwest. Several of our current Campaign for Human Development funded projects in different parts of Western Oregon engage in empowerment work, often in direct response to the realities of welfare reform. Let me give you a few examples. The first one is called the Community Alliance of Tenants in Portland. This group is comprised of low-income tenants, many of whom face the impact of welfare reform cutbacks and Section 8 housing cutbacks. These folks are organized to change the relations of power between tenants and landlords towards relations of mutual respect and fairness. Another would be the Neighborhood Pride Team, based in outer southeast Portland. It's a fine example of women and mothers of low income who are organizing for innovative and ecologically sustainable businesses, such as cottage industries, using waste products to create marketable items. I believe this is a very direct and gutsy response to welfare cutbacks. The Portland Organizing Project and its Family Investment Trust are geared directly for efforts to raise the earning power of people in the metropolitan region who earn very low incomes, in part because they need literacy training. And the last one I'll mention, there are really many, many more, is Pacto of Centro Cultural in Cornelius. Pacto's engaged in excellent relationship building between farm workers and small growers. It has a day labor program, provides leadership training, works with many area churches, and makes the connections between empowerment and cultural celebration. These, I believe, are all good examples of the vital work of justice, the work of justice of building relations of mutual respect and transforming power relations toward a community where we ask not only what the economy does to people, but how people participate in the economy. And finally, I'd like to give an example of a particular project of our Archdiocesan Office of Peace and Justice. It's our Archdiocesan Task Force on Homelessness. During the past year, the Catholic community of Western Oregon established this task force on homelessness, which has looked at the related issues of homelessness and the lack of affordable housing in our greater Portland metropolitan area. And the process has involved people who know homelessness and the lack of affordable housing firsthand. I have not yet received a final report from that task force, but I do know that it intends to help all of us become more familiar with the picture today and to understand some of the key causes of homelessness and unaffordable housing. And secondly, there will be an ethical framework suggesting that effective solutions to the problems of homelessness and costly housing require a shift on the part of all of us. There will be a call, I'm sure, to move away from habits of a marketing culture towards practices of what might be described as a relational culture, a clearly achievable process that will lead us beyond the realm of the possible to the doable. And then finally, I certainly hope this will be a part of the report, this is what's called for. The third section will spell out some suggested doables that can help us get close to the root of the problems. And so I thank you very, very much for your invitation to participate in this discussion. It's rather brash, I'm sure, for someone who's only been here 5 months to stand here and tell you people who have been working for a Just Oregon for a long time about what to do, and so I didn't try to put my words in those remarks. I wanted to share with you what I have discovered among my sisters and brothers in the Catholic community, things that make me proud, and things that I think can contribute to working for justice together here in Oregon. You folks here in Oregon have a reputation across this nation for being committed to the works of justice. And so I'm just kind of hopeful that my brief reflections have helped you appreciate what David was suggesting probably more strongly than I, the fact that our faith-based communities, and particularly the one I work for, the Catholic Church of Western Oregon, are good partners. We're good folks. And that in partnership with us, we can move forward and make this a better place for all people.
I'd like to thank our panelists today and for the success stories of collaborating together. My first question actually relates to wealth. We hear that we have a lot more millionaires coming into our communities, et cetera. I'd like to know how our community can work together to increase the art of giving, of time, and money.
Well, one contribution the faith community certainly can put forward is that the whole concept of stewardship. You know, we as a people, we may not always show it the way we live, but deep in our hearts we know that in the end we are basically stewards of all God's gifts, that life, creation, all that we have, all these things are gifts. And as stewards, they aren't just something for us to control. If I have more wealth, I'm just more responsible for trying to help the poor than someone who doesn't have so much. And that's a message I think that can resonate pretty well once people stop to think about it. Why do I have all this? If I can sing well, I should sing so people can enjoy my singing. If I play baseball well, I should play ball to entertain people. But if I have some resources that other folks don't have, they're not just mine for myself, they're intended for sharing.
Let me take a crack. I'm used to doing most of my pleading for giving in front of a legislative committee, not a public group. But for a different perspective on this, one of the things that's most valuable to the Department of Human Resources is the volunteer program that the state runs. We have thousands of volunteers in every corner of this state who give. They give not money, they give of their time and their energy. And without them, we would be lost in many communities. It's one of the most successful things that we do, and the way that we encourage that, I think, is to reward and acknowledge the work that they do, to remind them of the partnership that's so important for us in DHR out there. And I can't thank those folks enough, and I think they give well beyond their means in some cases to the benefit of people that are far less fortunate than they are.
One thing I noticed moving from the south to the northwest, there are a lot of similarities, but one big difference is y'all don't do church like we do down in the south. Now, that's a little bit of an interesting point of departure on your question, because one thing that the religious context, whether you're, again, as I tend to use, very interfaith approach to this, is that the congregation and that tradition provides a context of where wealth, for example, how we live, our priorities, there is a context in which that's put in and debated and discussed. And when people are not associated with organizations like the local congregation, you lose part of that contextualization. So part of our role as an ecumenical organization, but I think it's true for denominations and really calling to nonprofits that use volunteers and governmental entities, is to help people contextualize that experience maybe differently. They may be motivated because they care about someone who is hungry, but have never done the process to think about, well, systemically, where do I fit into that? Or how does my fortune or where I was born, how does that contextualize with my neighbor? And so part of what I think we can do is to be very cognizant about not letting that event be an isolated event of delivering a food box, but then contextualizing it through field trips, through getting to know people, through putting people, and whether they're decision makers or individuals like you and me, really having a chance to deepen that experience, to understand what is my neighbor's needs and how might that radicalize who I am and my belief. And it's really important because we live in an era, if you look at the studies, where giving is not what it used to be. And we're really at an interesting benchmark about what is going to happen. And there's a lot of money transferring hands and a lot of money being made. So I think our collective responsibility is helping people to contextualize that experience in different ways that might get at some of what you were asking about.
You know, I'd add the human connection. Bishop Steiner in Corvallis, who operates a parish shelter, says that it's very difficult to help the hardcore poor. It's like dealing with a house of cards. If you take one card out, the thing collapses. And poor families, if their car breaks down, you can lose a job. If you can't find child care, you're going to lose hours of work. And any little thing can just collapse their entire structure and their family life. So it's the human connection. There's a priest in Florida who works with 40,000 people are incarcerated there on probation or parole. He said he's never had a man tell him that his father loved him and was proud of him. And we need to make that human connection. And if we do that, we can lift up the lives of the poor.
Dan Goldie, City Club member. We economists know that the business cycle has not been repealed, and that economies that go up can also go down. This may happen sooner than later, given the turmoil in Eastern Asia and the fact that in Congress, the U.S. contribution to the International Monetary Fund, which is supporting the Asian economies, trying to bring them back, is being held hostage to a social agenda. My question is this: if the economy turns down, how capable is Oregon's program that you've described today, and indeed the country's program, other states, given the welfare reform program and the limitations in it on how much the federal government puts into the states?
Perhaps we can have some short comments on this so we can finish up.
Your observation is a good one, and we've tried to build the welfare reform program in Oregon to accommodate a change in the economy. That's why I said initially it's not built on a good economy. In the last 10 years, from 1987 to 1997, 21 employment districts in this state experienced declining employment in a time where statewide we're doing better. In all 21 of those, we were successful in finding jobs and putting people to work, and that's what we've got to be prepared to do, so that our strategies are not based on a strong economy, because indeed we will see a different economy at some point.
I'm afraid we have to cut it off at that. I'm sorry to have to do it. Welcome again, Archbishop Vlazny and David Leslie, to Portland. This is part of the ritual of a prominent person coming to town to speak to the City Club. I've seen a number of guests in the audience. If you would like to join the club, we have their applications back at the back table. Thanks for coming today.